Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Well, hello, everybody. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022. A couple of twos in the mix there, along with a three. Okay. That's the numbers that describe the day. That's it. I don't know what else to tell you. This morning's tweet from Bill in Portland, Maine, right on target today, just where I want to go, right off the bat. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live. That part was going to tell you that anyway. But, okay, apparently the anti-vax truckers in D.C., they're still here. Well, I mean, they're still there. Hagerstown, Maryland. They've come down with some sort of mystery illness. I hope, says Bill, that Kagro X, who is me, takes a whack at what that illness might be, because I'm stumped. Yes, it's true. I mean, that is to say, yes, it's true that I saw a tweet say that that was the case. But I trust this tweet because of the tweeter, I guess. Zach Petrizzo, who's been covering the thing that I guess you could call a convoy from day one, and maybe even before day one, for the Daily Beast, but most importantly on Twitter, because, you know, my subscription to the paper copy of the Daily Beast has run out. They don't deliver it to my mailbox a week later than all the stuff is written anymore. So I have to go online to get it, and Twitter's the easiest way. But he's been following since day one and has been providing on-the-ground reporting and photography ever since, even though there's nothing going on there. But he delights in letting us know that there really isn't anything going on there. But just in case anything serious happens, or we read another op-ed saying that we should take it seriously, we will know when the time comes and the prevailing sentiment shifts to taking them seriously. We'll all be ready to do so. But he reports today by way of Twitter, by which I mean reporting yesterday by way of Twitter, around 11:30 last night, as a matter of fact, that today out in Hagerstown, more and more truckers with the People's Convoy, as they call it, have complained about becoming sick with a bad cough. One streamer who goes by OTR Survival, which I gather is for on the road, unless it's like over the rainbow. That'd be really great. I should start calling them that. OTR Survival ended up going to an urgent care, which is full of doctors and science, so watch out, and described the illness as getting, quote, hit by a bus, which was interesting. I mean, you could have gone with hit by a truck. That might have made a little bit more sense for the context, but buses get all the blame, and I guess maybe it is being hit by a bus because if it was hit by a truck, then it would be a mess of their own making, and then they would have to reckon with what it was that was giving them this mystery cough that has all the symptoms of, well, you know what. So there you go. It happened in the Ottawa convoy as well. Huge mystery, given that they are ostensibly here to protest the vaccine mandates. I don't know how many of them are vaccinated and how many aren't. I mean, they might all be vaccinated in the American convoy. I really don't know, because they haven't really, it didn't make any sense for them to be here protesting the mandates anyway. So, and they quickly switched over to, you may recall the other day, declaring that they were opposed to, or they put a speaker on the stage anyway, who declared his opposition to the very existence of Black Lives Matter as a movement, and the street dedicated to the name of the movement in D.C. and how he was going to erase it. And then he went on to say that there would be tarring and feathering going on, and they would be tarring and feathering all their delegates, by which I assume they might have meant members of Congress. We haven't called the members of Congress delegates since the Continental Congress, but, founders, yada, yada, 1776. All the giant trucks they were driving in 1776, gives them an affinity for this stuff. Don't believe they've tarred or feathered anyone, let alone combination of the two. But you'd never know it by the excitement that continues out in Hagerstown. Boy, oh boy. Well, let's see. There was some news that I mentioned yesterday about what was going on out there. And, oh yes, right, that the the ostensible leader of the movement had taken off on vacation. I shared that story on the show, just sort of making mention of it, but and then gave Scott Anderson the link to the story to put in the roundup of the day's events and stories. But I don't think we read it. And you know what? I'm looking around, and now of course I don't see the thing handy, although I'm pretty sure we put it in there, so it should be in the archive. But I'll go back to my list and see if it happens to still be there. But yeah, I don't know why that's so elusive all of a sudden. I was pretty sure I had that at hand. Let's see, is it disguised in some of these tweets perhaps? Maybe that's what's going on. I'll have to check. No, I guess not. All right, well, that seems quite annoying. Maybe back in the archive if that's the case. Dang, I really thought that I had that set aside for you, and it would have been easier to share. What happened to that thing? All right, well, too bad. I think I can actually scroll back in my Twitter feed a day or two and find the thing, because I was so astonished to find it that I retweeted it to all of us. Let's see, other things happening in Twitter while I'm on my way there. We can make that the show today. Our regular Tuesday visit from Joan McCarter is on hiatus as the very important historical hearings going on in the Senate Judiciary Committee, of course, today for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Day 2 of the hearings, and of course they very cleverly scheduled them against this show so that Joan would be tied up live blogging it over at the front page at Daily Kos instead of here. You know, those fiends that they did, taking care of business at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's not so unusual. But anyway, it's just, whatever. I hate watching those things. I can't imagine having to live blog it. Well, they would never have asked me to live blog it because I would have, of course, made the whole thing anticlimactic. This is so stupid. I can't stand it anymore. The questions are dumb. It's driving me crazy. And that's not really a helpful live blog. Right? It's driving everybody crazy, but, and I don't know. I guess to some extent the crowd might be interested in complaining about how stupid the questioning is, or just how dumb hearing structure is. That they start at 9 o'clock in the morning and they make the nominee sit there, and the first thing is to go around the room and give every senator on the Senate Judiciary Committee 5 minutes to make a little speech and annoy everybody, and then maybe ask a question at the end. It's just the way they structure these things are terrible. Even worse, first thing in the morning, sometimes the chair and ranking member will give a 5-minute speech with no questions at the end, just so they can be on TV. And then, of course, these things are meant to be consumed in segments, so I can't imagine sitting there through the whole thing, even though they know that there are people who professionally have to, not just live bloggers, but, the lobbyists and the, if you're talking about regular legislation or whoever, if people from the administration helping the nominee through the process, etc. But senators think of it as the 5-minute intervals. That's what I said. You heard me. And, the only part that matters to them is their segment. That's the part where I'll be filmed and I can grab the clips and send them as video news releases via satellite to my local television stations, et cetera, et cetera. And then, therefore, that's all there is, to it. That's the only thing we care about. And so you'll frequently see, if you watch the whole thing, you will notice that, say, all the Republican senators are asking the same or similar questions over and over again. Sometimes it's because, well, it's always going to be because they only care about their segment. But very often they're also not there to hear other senators ask their questions, nor are they there to hear the answers of the nominee. They don't care. They're only interested in the ones that go as between them, and they're off doing other business until it's their turn, and then they show up, and then they ask questions as though nobody has asked, so what about this whole CRT thing, huh? And Judge Brown Jackson is doing a fantastic job keeping I wouldn't say a stony face, but it's not stony face. She's just got a friendly smile on, and her training, I'm sure, is, and it might even at this point just be her natural disposition, because that's how you live as well. I've certainly heard it said. I have no advice for women of color in terms of how to live their lives in white male society, but I imagine, and I feel like I've heard often enough from them and from those similarly situated that that's the way to live through life. You work hard at putting on that face that can't or shouldn't be mistaken by a normal person for the as it shouldn't be mistaken as contempt, even if that's what you're feeling, and even if it's not. But she's very well practiced at it, and the ability to sit there and not go completely crazy is incredible. So it's amazing that they've been able to, she and other nominees have been able to do this at all. But anyway, they sit there and they go through that, and it's awful. That's all I can tell you. All right, let's see. I think I've managed, with Scott's help here, to track down the article I'm looking for. Why it wasn't more immediately apparent, I don't know. But he sent me, I guess I must have sent him the tweet from yesterday, Zach's tweet from yesterday, about this guy taking off for a vacation. Somewhere down in the thread following that, from the thread about the trucker convoy in Hagerstown, was an article from the Washington Post. I've now found it, pocketed, about the guy taking off for vacation, which I'm sure that's what Judge Brown Jackson would like to do right now. But instead, she's sitting there, and Joan's watching her sit there. The uncomfortable leader of an angry crowd. I didn't realize he was so uncomfortable with his role in all of this. He is Brian Braze. You've heard me mention his name before because I've read your newspaper articles that start this way before. And the People's Convoy. This is all about the poor guy who appointed himself as leader of this thing. Yes, the 37-year-old lost his livelihood to the pandemic. It should be back now, but now he's not doing it because he's doing this instead. And GoFundMe, I guess, maybe pays better than driving a truck. Lost his livelihood to the pandemic and his son to suicide, which is terrible, before directing the right-wing protests circling the Capitol Beltway. And is this I should look and see. I thought that this headline might have had something more to do about how he had taken off for vacation, but no, it's in fact offered up as a reason why the guy might be suffering his burnout and take off. And that's as interesting as anything. And getting a personal profile, even if it is sympathetic profile, to a guy who's, made a semi-career out of, short career out of annoying everybody. But maybe we can get some insight into what's going on here. And it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to figure out what's going on in the guy's head and see if that helps us determine whether he's going to be around long term or not. After 11 days and 2,500 miles on highways leading hundreds of truckers, and they eventually did get to that, and other supporters across the United States, Brian Braze has finally stopped as close to the nation's capital as he could. Now he had to make a choice. So this was, I guess, the decision about whether or not to bother entering Washington, D.C., or whether to camp out in Hagerstown instead. Was this the moment to lead this people's convoy into downtown D.C. and raise hell? Braze mulled the question that first Saturday night, a day after the convoy arrived at a Speedway parking lot in Western Maryland. He had to decide what was best to make the protesters' point. And they haven't yet decided exactly what was best to make that point. How this 37-year-old trucker from Northwest Ohio came to be the one to make that decision is a reflection of a man torn by contradictions, who doesn't fit easily into any one narrative. Aha, you thought he did. I did too. Of what this convoy or its leader is about. And that's right. As a matter of fact, somewhere, I think, in the tweets about his taking a vacation, there's also a Washington Post story, and maybe it'll be linked in this story somewhere along the sidebar, about there being some dispute about the leadership or what the true purpose of the convoy was. I believe the nominal leaders of the convoy split with those members of the convoy who, I told you yesterday, made the video of them boxing in a Tesla driver on the Beltway and attempting to make a citizen's arrest. Apparently, by the way, the event that triggered their anger here was what they claim was a brake check, that this guy in the Tesla got himself in front of the trucks and then slammed on the brakes to slow them down, or for, maybe there's a squirrel in front of him, I don't know. But they got angry about it and figured he had no right to do that, and that a citizen's arrest was in order. Which, I don't know whether I totally disagree. I suppose if you could be endangering a lot of lives by causing an accident in a situation like that. And sometimes I feel like that's warranted. Although citizen's arrest, generally speaking, just not really a thing. If you're thinking of effecting a citizen's arrest, you're probably doing it wrong. But maybe we can have a Vox explainer of how to correctly effect a citizen's arrest. Anyway, back to Brian Braze. Let's see. Braze finds himself at the center of a movement that has swollen to include not just parents concerned about vaccine mandates for their children, not just parents, but also truck drivers as well. It also involves men associated with violent extremist groups and people who falsely believe government leaders are running satanic child sex trafficking rings, right? What about them? He has emerged as the de facto leader who keeps it all together, believe it or not, even as he says he wishes that had never happened. And me too. So I'm with you there, Brian, and I'm sure, I would think you were a sensible guy if you would say, well, I don't mind leading the truckers, but the Q people are weird and I can't stand them. The 6'2" flannel-wearing organizer seems to connect easily with his followers. He portrays himself as accessible, telling the crowds that he won't take a meeting with a lawmaker unless it is live streamed and addresses supporters' concerns head on, whatever they may be. He rallies the crowd with his most popular chant, demanding that politicians remember they work for us. In those moments, Braze's personal beliefs on such issues as the 2020 election, or masks, or critical race theory are not important. Supporters chant along with him, attracted to the broader anti-establishment sentiments, fueling their outrage. He has fostered an environment where certain truths are somehow debatable, including whether January 6th, 2021 was a violent insurrection, or whether research shows the coronavirus vaccine to be safe and effective. All under the guise of free speech. It's the type of open stance that can appeal to everyone in the crowd, a blank canvas for the aggrieved. Braze has welcomed far-right extremists into his group, but he does not view himself as one. Well, once you welcome him in, you are one. His beliefs, he said, do not align with the fringes that he's attracted and encouraged to gather at the Hagerstown Speedway. He's not sure what to think of the 2020 presidential election results, even though he voted for Donald Trump for president, and some of his followers brag about being among the insurrectionist mob that attacked the U.S. Capitol. He's uncomfortable receiving a coronavirus vaccine, but would not stop someone else, including his daughter, from taking one. He believes the pandemic is real, so really he should probably take some time and give some thought to what he's all about before leading an event like this, but okay. Convoy supporters rail against critical race theory academic framework, but Braze acknowledges that CRT is not taught in K-12 schools, and he supports it being taught in colleges. He doesn't believe in banning books and is fine with students reading novels by Toni Morrison, although the late author's work is a frequent target of right-wing attacks. He thinks schools should teach the country's full history, including the enslaving of black people by white people. Still, he supports those at the Speedway flying the Confederate flag. So, what a leader, I guess, is what I'm saying. All right, well, I'll finish up the tea as it's getting cold. But, yeah, I mean, I guess you might wonder why the convoy is directionless and has no stated goals. And I guess the answer is its leader doesn't even know why he's there. It seems a little unusual to me. He told the crowd never to vote a straight ticket, even as many disparaged Democrats. Before a Republican senator visited the Speedway, he asked drivers to refrain from chanting, "Let's go Brandon." You all know what that's about. He wants to be seen as bipartisan. What do you know? And insists there are Democrats around the Speedway. He says this protest is about the government's mandating actions on health care that he feels should be personal decisions, but his reasons for joining the movement are more complicated. The pandemic hurt his livelihood, and he recently suffered a devastating loss that left him searching for answers and a purpose. I could find it hard to go back to work, I'm sure, after something like that. But, I bet the livelihood could be back if you wanted it to be, but, the other things going on in his life probably get in the way. This convoy, he thought, could be that mission, but he said he never meant to become the leader. The mood at Hagerstown Speedway that Saturday night was tense. Braze could tell there were people looking for a fight. The crowd, if encouraged by the wrong message, would be capable of anything, he worried. Convoys around the D.C. Beltway doesn't do squat, let's say, to the legislators, doesn't do a thing, literally nothing, Braze said in an interview. That's true. The only advantage to the loops around the Beltway is the fear that we might grab an exit. It was a choice similar to one facing leaders of the mainstream Republican Party: appeal to a wide audience or follow the rallying cries and untrue claims about electoral fraud that led to the January 6th insurrection. I mean, that's actually the same thing, but okay. Braze already made the choice to welcome the right-wing extremists with ideologies that have led to violence, and I wonder whether he welcomed them as a matter of free speech or, more likely began by saying, I can't stop them, they'll threaten to beat me up or shoot me, and a lot of the people here support it, and I'll be chucked out as leader, so I might as well just say I welcome them, even if I don't. Braze walked the grounds of the Speedway, shaking hands and meeting newcomers, but something felt off. He was in his head, consumed by the decision. He stayed awake, he said, researching the history of the iconic civil rights leaders Nelson Mandela and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. He knew the crowd would follow his orders. I have my doubts sometimes, too, about whether any of this stuff is true. Like, if I need to present a mainstream bipartisan front, those are the names I'll call out, whether or not I'm researching them. And I don't know. I think, it's always good to research if you're going to try. The next morning, a large wooden cross leaned against the makeshift stage as Braze walked up, turned to address the people who had traveled with him from Southern California and those who had only recently joined the group and were calling themselves a movement. The crowd of mostly white men looked up at Braze with his megaphone in hand. Today, we decided that we're going to go onto the Beltway, he said to cheers. We're going to do this peacefully. We're going to do this with some class. We're not going to shut anything down today. And now the devastating loss and a new direction. This is the part I'm most interested in hearing about, I think. Braze grew up in a truck. He remembers spending summers next to his father on the road, but never thought he'd do the same. He thought he would be a military lifer. He spent 5 years in the Iowa Army National Guard. But when his wife at the time wanted to return home to Pennsylvania, Braze joined the Pennsylvania Army National Guard. Soon he went looking for something else to do and was drawn to what he knew. He'd been driving a truck for about 5 years. He has been now. And owns a blue 1999 Freightliner FLD 120. How about that? He became involved as an industry advocate, starting the United States Transportation Alliance with Mike Landis, who is also one of the organizers of the People's Convoy, and he knows all about things like, hey, you gotta put pillows in a truck, I guess, to drive them around. I got out of it, Braze said of the Transportation Alliance, realized if you didn't have enough money to pad their pockets for re-election, they didn't care what you had to say. Braze said he lives in Northwest Ohio, but is originally from Lidditz, Pennsylvania. Fantastic pretzel there in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. How about that? He has hauled steel coils, sheetrock, lumber, and other building material, bulldozers and tractors, and entertainment supplies, delivering staging, lighting, and audio to arenas for musicians. This is, by way of saying you can put almost anything in one of those trucks. Okay, fine. During the 2020 onset of the coronavirus pandemic, he was sitting on a loading dock getting ready to go on tour with ZZ Top. When he got the call that the tour was canceled, he said in an interview with Truck Boss Show, whatever that is, an Oklahoma City-based program about trucking. Thank you. I parked the truck waiting to find out what my next tour was going to be, Braze said. Then out of nowhere, within the next 2 weeks, every single thing canceled. I know, we all had that problem, truckers and non-truckers alike. The pandemic had disrupted his life, taking away business and creating a new wedge between him and his eldest daughter. She has been vocal about her dislike of Trump and her belief that it is everyone's civic obligation to be vaccinated. Her father disagreed. She thinks it's everybody's duty to get a vaccine. People that won't get the vaccine, she believes, is like a disservice to humanity, Braze said. I just tell her that I believe in freedom of choice, but it's still a disservice to humanity. It doesn't help. But it was something else that sent him out on his journey, the loss of his son. In September, his 16-year-old son, Dominic Lee Braze, died by suicide. Dom's death shook everything Braze believed in, he said. His Catholic upbringing taught him that those who die by suicide go to hell. Well, it does teach you that. And though he never really believed that, he fell apart. And I mean, obviously the death will make you fall apart, and it's quite enough. Braze's body is covered in little reminders of these horrors. On his right arm is a semicolon, a common suicide awareness tattoo in the color teal for post-traumatic stress disorder awareness. He rolled up the right leg of his pants to reveal a large abstract skull tattooed, a skull head tattooed on the back of his calf. A butterfly stretches across the eyes, and a clock arches over the top with bullets for hands. Boy, oh boy. It's the tattoo from his own suicide attempt years ago. The skull represents death. Probably could have figured that one out. The clock signals time for healing, and the butterfly is half blue, showing depression, and half monarch, displaying strength to overcome. Well, he'd be a good tattoo designer, if not trucking organizer and leader. As he tells it, Braze started following the protests in Canada and wondered why there hadn't been similar demonstrations in the United States. And the answer is because most of the truckers were not actually affected by the international boundary the way they would have been in Canada. But what the heck, let's just do the same thing. And then he did, and here we are. Wow.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Well, I'm not seeing a lot about his decision to take the vacation. That, I guess, remains confined for now to the tweet that we had on that subject the other day. So, at any rate, this is interesting background on the guy. I don't know if I want to go on for too long with this. It's actually a fairly lengthy article, but I guess just to give you a little bit more in the way of context to what's going on in this guy's head. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, he's probably almost certainly representative of the truckers in the convoy. But we elites, as they would say, probably don't identify a great deal with all of these problems. I mean, certainly everybody's families, many families of all kinds are touched by suicide or the loss of livelihood and the search for new direction. But not all of us approach things the same way, of course. So where were we? With Braze had been watching the same thing happening in Canada and said, well, why don't we have that here? And there were reasons for that, but he didn't, answer that question. He started to wonder why we weren't having them here. But rather than actually answer that question, he said, why don't we just do it? We'll have it here, and we won't have to have a reason for doing it. The reason for doing it is because they had it in Canada. And that's why they've never been able to come up with a purpose here. So that's it. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I think that explains his decision-making process. As Ottawa-inspired spin-offs popped up on social media, he became more involved, joining groups and talking with people interested in starting a convoy, even as many U.S. pandemic-related mandates had already been blocked or lifted. While on the road, he said he found a new connection with God. And I'm sure that does happen from time to time, but that tends to give you the, I don't know what, justification you need in order to be a leader. Why am I doing this? God called me to it, or God didn't tell me not to do it. Once I found God and I asked him, should I do it? There was no obvious sign that I shouldn't, so I figured I'd been inspired by God to do it. The convoy has attracted so many Christian supporters that every group meeting and rally starts with a prayer. And how couldn't it? If you said, no, this really has nothing to do with religion. We're here about regulation and social freedoms, et cetera, et cetera. No. You're anti-God now. We won't follow you anymore. Okay, fine. We'll do the prayer each morning, and now you've lost control of things. Christian nationalism is also evident in the group's rhetoric. Leaders and drivers compared Monday's convoy into and around D.C. to the biblical Battle of Jericho, the conflict in which the city's walls fell to the sound of trumpets after it was encircled by an Israelite army for 7 days. There are, of course, no walls around D.C., I will add. It's not here in the article, but I think you also know that that's true. I would venture to say there are also no Israelites encircling the city in these trucks or otherwise. And I would venture to say that you might have trouble as an overt Israelite in the midst of this crowd, although there are probably a few people that would fish you out of the crowd stomping you, saying that you paid Fauci to unleash COVID as part of a plot by George Soros and or the Rothschild family, neither of whom we knew were Jewish. Don't look at me. I'm not anti-Semitic. I loved Israel. We can't wait for it to be destroyed in a conflagration with its neighbors so that Jesus can come back, because everyone knows Jesus said, I'm not coming back here until you slaughter all of my fellow Jews. I think that was made pretty clear in the Bible. Anyway, for some reason they now believe that that's the case. And also, by the way, that Jesus is a white American guy. But, what can you do? It's sincerely held religious belief, and apparently the answer is you can't do anything about that whatsoever. The whole process, Braze goes on, between my son and this has made me like a big believer in God, Braze said. Doesn't mean I'm going to church. I ain't going to church. Which is, lots of people feel that way too, although I will point out it's a little bit of a gimmitarian sort of situation. Like, I want to be able to tell people I'm a big believer in God so that they won't switch me off at this rally. But I'm not doing this. I'm not going to church. That's just out. And he can't, because if he goes to church, for him that means, I guess, going to the Catholic Church, unless he's switched religions along the way. And then all these people will be just as angry with him probably as they are with the Israelites, even though they love Israelites. Anyway, Brace does not know what to think about the 2020 presidential election, right? Despite many of his supporters emphatically believing it was, quote, rigged. In past elections, he said, truckers have always been able to guess by yard signs across the country who was going to win. Aha! That just goes to prove how smart my theory about yard signs is. It's actually quite dumb. And here's more proof of how dumb it is. In his view, the 2020 election was the first time they got it wrong. I'm not saying I believe in one thing or another, Braze said. I don't know. I'm not going to pretend to know. But that actually has probably a lot more to do with the fact that Trump signs are posted more or less illegally along public rights of way and highways more often than anyone else's signs, because there's no law for Trump supporters and they want the signs there, and that's why they got it wrong. Anyway, when people falsely claim the coronavirus vaccines are harmful, he shrugs it off, saying he's not a scientist or a doctor. He calls himself a blue-collar truck driver and says there's both sides to vaccine safety and efficacy. So far, no one speaking to the convoy in Hagerstown has pointed out the proven benefits of the coronavirus vaccine. And, of course, whatever. Something, we are doing Canada thing, we're not doing Canada thing, whatever. Though Braze joined this movement as an organizer and promoted it in TV appearances on Fox News shows such as Tucker Carlson Tonight and Fox and Friends, as well as on Newsmax, he corrects people who label him the leader. He insists he's a co-organizer. Boo, that's inclusiveness. That's CRT. Get him, I would say, if I were trying to agitate the crowd. Okay, well, I don't know. I think we probably can end our read-through of this at this point, since it's not going to give us anything about what we were originally interested in, the idea of his taking a vacation, which is very interesting, I think. Is this, I don't know. This is interesting. So I was scrolling down to see whether or not there were any of those other pieces here where they say, there's more on the convoy here at the Washington Post. Come and read this thing. And the first one on the list is what looks like the same article we're reading now. So that's not more on the People's Convoy. It's this thing that you're reading now on the People's Convoy, which, talk about clickbait, right? So now you'll click on it and you don't even get a different story, but they get the click nonetheless. That's pretty weird. Is there anything about the guy taking a vacation? I don't know. I don't think so. Well, that seems pretty weird. Oh, let's see. Message from Scott here. Reported by the Daily Beast. Okay. Oh, the Daily Beast did this thing. Okay. Thank you. Well, at least I'm not crazy. Well, I mean, I am, but I can't find this story. How about that? There it is, though. Zach tweeted it, and then reported by the Daily Beast. He just sort of sent me a clip of it here. By Sunday morning's meeting, the convoy turned their focus to their absent leader, Brian Braze, who had taken the weekend off to visit with family back home in Northwest Ohio, a move that left his fellow truckers confounded. I guess I could search on that and get a whole, I don't know, was there an article on it, or is he just tweeting about it? I felt like I had an article about it at some point, but at any rate, we'll see if I can't dig it up and share it with you. There's a million other things, though, that I could and should be sharing with you. Some parked in Pocket and some just retweeted this morning, including this fun Twitter thread by Stephanie Tate, who tweets as, in the Twitter bio here, author, speaker, disabled disability consultant, flower lady. How about that? Trauma survivor, many things. But no blue check mark, so just a regular person like you and me. We could lead truck convoys, me and Stephanie, if we wanted to. But satirical look at mitigation strategy mockery that we find out there. Asking, is it time to talk about off-ramps for hand washing? Hey, how about that? I mean, like the norovirus, things like norovirus are endemic. We need to learn to live with them and stop revolving our lives around trying to prevent sickness with such high survival rates. We can't expect people to wash their hands forever. Sounds pretty familiar, right? I don't wash my hands because I believe in the immune system God gives me. It's unhealthy to try to avoid viruses and bacteria and leads to underdeveloped immune systems. If you eat healthy and take vitamins D and C and zinc, hand washing isn't necessary. It's just virtue signaling. You know how it goes. So anyway, she goes on and makes all the same claims, but just swaps in hand washing for masks and or vaccines. And it does a pretty good job of displaying exactly how ludicrous this whole thing is. Now I'm fearing that if I read the whole thing, YouTube will take the show down again. But then again, it doesn't really matter a great deal, even if they do. I don't know. We're 2 for 2 eventually with them on this. Schools, they say, are pushing hand-washing propaganda on kids as young as kindergarten. How much of their school day is wasted on performative hand-washing? This is all great, right? And these kids still get sick anyways, because hand-washing does not work. I tell my kids not to participate. They have rights. I mean, if you're scared, you can keep washing your hands, but you can't reasonably expect your waitress, your barista, your nurse, your dentist to wash their hands if they aren't sick. It's a matter of choice. We all need to respect each other's choices here. Could lead a convoy with this. Look, I washed my hands in 2020 when they told us to. I did my part. I sang my 2 happy birthdays like everyone else, but when does it stop? Or are we expected to live like this forever? There has to be a reasonable plan for how this ends. That's all I'm saying. Somebody else says, hey, there's been a drop in herpes virus and HIV cases. I think it's time to treat ourselves to weaker protections against those viruses, like the CDC did with Mask Up and COVID-19. And she says, exactly. The fact that we're still being asked to take precautions against these diseases that are in no way threatening our hospital system right now is just proof that it was never about public health. It was just about government control. Hashtag think for yourself. You get the idea here. And of course, somebody has to spring on her later on. You've already been overtaken. Satire already overtaken by reality. The story of the Fox News host Pete Hegseth, who at some point a while back said, I haven't washed my hands in 10 years, which, I don't know whether I hope it's true or not, quite honestly. Anyway, you get the idea. And it's quite funny, but also quite sad, because it's not going to change anything. And people really do run around thinking these things. And there were a lot of people who, of course, didn't get the joke and said, no, washing your hands is very important. And it is, and you should, and they're right. But, they sort of missed the point on that one. All right, let's see. Other things. I'm going to go back over to Pocket here and pull up some of the other articles that I had saved for you. Never did get to the bottom of where I'm sure I read, and probably at the Daily Beast. Maybe I should go there and look for it. But they definitely they did. I swear. You think I'm wrong? They really did have an article about the guy taking a short break. But okay, there you go. I thought he was taking like 2 weeks off, but he's going over the weekend to Ohio. But now the weekend's over. Is he back? I don't know. I haven't seen reporting about that yet. Also no reporting yet, though I didn't search very hard, I must admit, about whether or not Clarence Thomas is out of the hospital after, went in on Friday. So let's say Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's not such a long hospital stay. But of course, they thought he was going to be out by the end of the weekend, and he's not, because, I don't know, mystery infection. It's a weird illness, and what can you do? Just like the people up in Hagerstown who don't believe that they have, they don't believe they have COVID, and yet they have this mystery illness too. And I think too, what was interesting? Let me go back now. Was there more other people's comments, I guess, on the thread about the illness, but others, I think, saying, here we are. Other commenters saying that, who is it that has it? It doesn't say who, but he says, here we go. One response to Zach. This guy, is he blaming anthrax, like the people at the anti-vaccine convention that time? They pumped anthrax into our green room. This is a tweet from DC and Anti-Fascist Action, featuring one of the truckers saying, meet John Biggard. That's OTR. Yeah, it is OTR Survival on YouTube. Violent racist convoy member, they say, from Maryville, Tennessee. On March 14th, John live streamed himself getting out of his truck and screaming at a driver and hitting his window. Once back in his truck, he mocked the driver's accent and calling him an effing idiot, which is something I fairly frequently want to do with people, but I don't act out. Well, anyway, another commenter says that OTR, I guess because he's got a YouTube channel and he would do it there, claims to have a sinus infection, but the commenter says, sounds like it's COVID, actually. OTR says he was prescribed a Z-Pack. It's an antibiotic and steroid injection. The antibiotic in the Z-Pack doesn't work for sinus infections, says this guy, but I don't know. I mean, why not? But Z-Packs are routinely used for COVID. Steroid injections aren't used for sinus infections at all. That's what his claim is. I don't know. It doesn't sound like he's a doctor, but maybe not. Somebody else later on argues, well, Z-Packs actually could. Yeah, Z-Packs and steroids are both used frequently for sinus infections, says another commenter, Laurie Stone. Anyway, so who knows? And I only add that because I knew that was confusing and weird and not really sound medical advice, but I add that the guy says he doesn't have COVID and he's taking antibiotics because he has a sinus infection, and it harkened back to the release about Clarence Thomas, who said he was taking antibiotics too. But I did mention it might not necessarily be the case that he's taking antibiotics because he doesn't have a viral infection. It might be because he's insisting on taking them because he thinks he has a bacterial infection because he won't admit he has a viral infection and that it's COVID. And this happens from time to time, although I would think it would be very difficult for him to hoodwink the doctors at Sibley into giving him the wrong medication for no reason. But, high-profile patient, I don't know. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if it turns out, yeah, he's got COVID. Well, what about this that you were saying you were giving him antibiotics? We were. He insisted on it. It was stupid, but, we did it. I wouldn't be terribly surprised if that was part of the outcome. All right. Let's see. I got to get off of this subject and on to other ones because there's so many interesting and fun things to look at, including this news that I picked up in the tweet thread about the mysterious illness. I'm right back on it. I have to give you this one. The mysterious illness that's affecting everyone in the trucker convoy. Somebody said, yeah, this happened in Ottawa too. And because we come back to this subject all the time, I thought you might be interested in it. I'll share it with Greg tomorrow. The Ottawa Citizen reporting during the Canadian convoy that the wastewater index blip that they found, the higher incidence of COVID-19 being shed in the wastewater in Ottawa happens, by the way, to have coincided with the convoy arrival. Isn't that weird? So, yeah, even there they were monitoring their wastewater, and mysteriously the trucker convoy brought a blip/spike, depending on who you ask, of prevalence of COVID or evidence of COVID in the wastewater. And golly, what a mystery it was. No one can figure out why these anti-vaccine convoys keep coming up short on the COVID prevention front. All right, let's see. Other stories. I think we can finally escape from the convoy focus. Let's see. Oh, yes, right. There's news on that front, certainly. A couple of different directions we could be going. That's an exciting one. Why don't we save that for next segment? Here's news from, rounded up in the Washington Post. But first, a tweet about the story, to give you the long story short. Michael Scherer sharing this. This from the Washington Post piece. The ex-wife of Missouri Senate candidate Eric Greitens. Remember him? He was more than just a Missouri Senate candidate. He was once the governor of Missouri, forced to resign when they found out he was, imprisoning women and beating them up in his basement as part of a weird sex game. And everyone said, ew, gross. And he was forced to resign before he realized, oh my God, I'm a Republican. What am I doing resigning in the face of a sex and violence scandal? And really, it was the violence that was the scandal. I mean, yeah, whatever. I can't tell you what to do about the sex part, but you can't, be violent with people. That's bad. And I guess that still makes Republicans resign. And if he had really sat and thought about it, and I could have said, you can't do anything to me, I'm a Republican, I refuse to leave, that might have worked. That led us to the rise of Josh Hawley. And so it should surprise no one that Josh Hawley opposes Greitens' candidacy for the Senate. And I don't even know what the situation is. Is Hawley in the seat temporarily as a special election winner? And are they going to run against one another? Is that why he's so opposed to it, or he just doesn't want to serve with the guy? Well, let's read the article. Anyway, right now the news is the ex-wife of Greitens here accused him in court on Monday of knocking her down, so he's punching everybody, taking away her cell phone and keys, physically abusing their children, child abuse, and repeatedly threatening suicide, more suicide, if she did not publicly support him. And to think we could have been rid of him that easily. I mean, I don't want to advocate the suicide thing here, but I suspect that he really meant, I'm going to threaten suicide, but then what I'm really talking about is murder-suicide, and I might not do the suicide part after I finish murdering you. Probably. I'm just guessing, but I'm improperly putting myself in the head of somebody who I guess needs actual psychiatric attention, and I can't provide that. And it's, what's happening here, just in the way of full disclosure, I don't like Eric Greitens very much. And I think he's a bit of a scumbag, and I probably shouldn't be doing his diagnosis as a result. If I were a clinical psychiatrist, I would say, I'm off of this case. Anyway, Michael Scherer now reporting for the Washington Post, because he knew all about the story. That's how he knew to tweet about it. The ex-wife of Missouri GOP Senate candidate Eric Greitens, we'll say, accused him in court on Monday, at least in documents. She didn't make a court appearance. Knocking her down, taking away her cell phone and keys, all the stuff that we just read, of course. I shouldn't neglect to say physically abusing their children, and repeatedly threatening suicide if she did not publicly support him during the 2018 scandal that led to his resignation as governor. So that's interesting. I'll kill myself if you don't support me in my struggle to get past the fact that I was having an affair with somebody else, but also beating them up. And I think I'm on her side on this one. The filing by Sheena Greitens prompted some Republicans in Missouri, including Senator Josh Hawley, to call on the former governor to leave the race. Hawley has been critical of Greitens in the past and has endorsed a competing candidate. So they're not running for the same seat. He just doesn't want anything to do with the guy. And this is the interesting part. If you hit a woman or child, you belong in handcuffs, not the United States Senate, he wrote, which I thought was a laudable position to take. But I will point out, and first I'll try and scroll down and give credit to the person who made the point, who I merely retweeted, but who made the excellent point that, if Josh Hawley really believed that that was true, that is to say, if you hit a woman or a child, you belong in handcuffs, not the United States Senate, well then, while he was in the United States Senate, he could have, should have, and would have voted for the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. But mysteriously, he did not do that. So that's kind of strange. I mean, it's a nice, strong statement, but he's not exactly putting his money where his mouth is, if you know what I'm saying. All right, well, let's see. It's not all that easy to find, but somebody else made that very cogent observation, and it wasn't me. So there you go. All right, well, too bad I don't see it immediately in order to give proper credit where credit is due. Let's go back then to the article. Let's see, Senators Joni Ernst, Republican of Iowa, who, like Hawley, had endorsed another candidate in the Missouri Senate race, and John Thune of South Dakota also said Monday that Greitens should withdraw from the race. Sheena Greitens, who now lives with their children in Austin, where she works as a university associate professor, described for the first time publicly what she said she experienced at the end of their marriage in documents filed as part of an ongoing child custody dispute in Missouri State Court. In early June 2018, I became afraid for my safety and that of our children at our home, which is fairly isolated, due to Eric's unstable and coercive behavior, she wrote in the filings, which was obtained from Boone County Circuit Court. This behavior included physical violence toward our children, such as cuffing our then 3-year-old son across the face, not handcuffing, but smacking him across the face at the dinner table in front of me and yanking him around by the hair. Sheena Greitens also said that after her ex-husband knocked her down and took her cell phone, keys, and wallet from her in April of 2018, he explained his actions to her mother. When my mother later confronted him about this, he told her that he did so to prevent me from doing anything that might damage his political career. That's not a great explanation. She described one of her children coming home from a visit with Eric Greitens in November of 2019 with a swollen face, bleeding gums, and a loose tooth. He said Dad had hit him. However, Eric said they were roughhousing and it had been an accident. Could be. Sheena Greitens said in the document the tooth, she added, later died and had to be removed. Eric Greitens responded to the filing Monday afternoon with a statement on Twitter saying he would fight against completely fabricated, baseless allegations. I'm seeking full custody of my sons, and for their sake I will continue to pray for their mother and hope that she gets the help that she needs, he wrote. Earlier, his campaign manager, Dylan Johnson, accused Sheena Greitens of being emotionally abusive and of launching what is clearly a politically motivated attack against him. This attack is nothing more than a sad attempt to force a father to yield custody of his children to a deranged individual, Johnson said. So you get to see where this is going. And they just will accuse the other of being deranged. The couple's marriage ended, you may have guessed, in divorce in March of 2020 after a public scandal over allegations that Eric Greitens had taken a photo of a blindfolded, bound, and undressed woman with whom he was having an affair and threatened to use it against her as blackmail. He has admitted to the affair but denied the specific allegations, including taking the photo. It just appeared. God took the photo, I'm sure. A felony charge against him alleging invasion of privacy against the woman, his former hairdresser, thought he was a tough guy, was later dropped by prosecutors. You can't be a tough guy with a hairdresser. I'm fairly sure of that in Republican crowds. It just doesn't work. Unless you're Donald Trump. Weird. Anyway, it sounds bad. And it sounds like the whole thing is resurfacing. And I hope that it'll keep him from public office. But just wanted to let you know that this was going on. Probably after this, more detail than we actually need to know about this. But perhaps worth reviewing in a different context. Let's see, as we get towards the top of the hour here, anything else that we can add in the next minute or so before we take our break? Probably not. Okay, but I'm just scrolling down. Everything is sort of a long form read at this point. Let's see. We covered these things yesterday, thanks to Greg for those threads about Ukraine and the transportation issues that the Russian army is experiencing. Okay, well, we'll take a quick break and come back for the second hour of the show, and I guess we'll hit the long form books when we come back and read a little bit more about some of the more esoteric topics, I guess, and go deep on some of the other things. Interesting items by way of background, both on the pandemic, something I discussed yesterday, and on the Ukraine situation. A little bit of background on Vladimir Putin. Perhaps you've heard of him, a key player in the confrontation happening and unfolding now in Eastern Europe. Can you believe it? All right, we'll be right back in 1 minute with more. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Okay, let's see. Oh, I didn't mention this one, although this was this I could have fit in the 1 minute that we had before the break. Happened to see this tweeted around yesterday, thanks to Susan Gardner, who sent this out from Axios, their tweet and an accompanying article. Trump unloads on Brett Kavanaugh for his Supreme Court votes. I guess he's disagreed with some of the decisions he's joined on one side or another in some of the big cases. And I didn't even realize that was the case. And well, he does bash him a bit. Where would he be? Should we do it in his voice? Where would he be without me? I saved his life. He wouldn't even be in a law firm. Who would have had him? Nobody. Totally disgraced. Only I saved him. That seems like maybe a little ambitious of a statement, but yeah. Susan was saying, that seems kind of unwise, given that the number of cases that Trump says anyway that he'd like to take to the Supreme Court, and that would make things awfully difficult if you had personally attacked some of the conservative justices that you hoped would vote with you. I'm not really certain what it was that motivated him to make the attack. Maybe Axios will tell us, but I'm always reluctant to read Axios. But by the way, in answer to the question of where would Brett Kavanaugh be without Donald Trump, not even in a law firm, he was on what many people consider to be the second highest court in the land, the Circuit Court for the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. I mean, George W. Bush put him there. It doesn't make any sense to worry about how he might not have had anybody pay off all of his debts as quickly so that he could clear the nominations process for the Supreme Court. That's true, but by his own telling, he was doing just fine in those things. And his dad is wealthy. But, he wasn't in a law firm because he didn't need to be in a law firm. He had a lifetime appointment to a very prominent and very important federal court. But, what am I going to do? Bicker with Donald Trump about whether or not the stuff he wants to, whatever, the things he wants to tell people at rallies is smart or logical? That's not going to go anywhere. I wonder if Axios' article will tell us why he's mad specifically. Oh, it's in a book. It happens in a book. Michael Wolff book at that. Mike Allen. Oh, boy. I got to read a Mike Allen story about a Michael Wolff book. Trump unloads on Kavanaugh, a new Michael Wolff book. Let's find out why. Former President Donald Trump, in a book out Tuesday by Michael Wolff, says he is, quote, very disappointed in votes by Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, his own hard-won nominee, and that he hasn't had the courage you need to be a great justice. Driving the news, as they like to say in Axios, there were so many others I could have appointed, and everyone wanted me to, Trump told Wolff in an interview for the cheekily titled Landslide. That's the name of the book, Landslide, The Final Days of the Trump Presidency. Where would he be without me? I saved his life. He wouldn't even be in a law firm. Who would have had him? Nobody. Totally disgraced. Only I saved him. And I don't know nobody knew who the hell he was. I mean, in general. But he was on a very important court. There was no saving necessary. He had a lifetime appointment. He was set forever. But whatever. Okay. Between the lines, let's see. I hate their headings and everything. After the election, as Axios' Jonathan Swan reported in his Off the Rails series, Trump saved his worst venom for people who he believed owed him because he got them their jobs. He would rant endlessly about the treachery of Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, reminding people of how he shot up in the primary polls after Trump endorsed him. Over lunches in the private dining room adjoining the Oval Office, Trump used to reminisce about how he saved Kavanaugh by sticking by him. He didn't save him at all. He moved him, by the way, from one federal job does being a justice of the Supreme Court, you'd think it would be a pay raise. I don't know whether it really is, though. I'm just curious. Does it even earn more? Do they earn more money there than they do at the D.C. Circuit? I'm not sure. I wonder if all the federal judges' salaries are the same. I never looked. Anyway, for Kavanaugh to not do Trump's bidding on the matter of ultimate importance, overturning the election, was in Trump's mind a betrayal of the highest order. Does he not have that to say about Amy Coney Barrett? Here we go. Wolff writes that Trump feels betrayed by all three justices he put on the court because none of them voted to take up the cases that he wanted to use to overturn the election because they were garbage, and even they were embarrassed to do this. But he really thought they were going to do it. That's kind of amazing. Although, every once in a while, we really think they're going to do it too. So, and I don't know whether they should be taken as proof that they won't or as proof that they eventually will if the situation is right. Because, I don't know. As we've demonstrated, there's no barrier, and certainly no physical barrier to their doing it. They just have to decide they want to do it, and it's done. Even if it is baseless, they don't have to provide a basis either. That's what's so scary about it. But they were asked to do it, and they didn't, so maybe that means something. It has to, right? Anyway, Wolff writes that Trump feels betrayed by all three of them, including Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, but reserved particular bile for Kavanaugh. Recalling the brutal confirmation fight, Trump said, practically every senator called me and said, cut him loose, sir, cut him loose. He's killing us, Kavanaugh. I said, I can't do that. So it's not really a matter of I was brave. I can't. I can't do that because I'm so brave. I had plenty of time to pick somebody else, Trump continued. I went through that thing and fought like hell for Kavanaugh. And I saved his life. I saved his career. At great expense to myself, okay? I fought for that guy and kept him. I didn't want anything, but I'm very disappointed in him and his rulings, Trump said. I didn't want anything, but then when I didn't get the things, I was very angry. But I didn't want them, so it's okay. I can't even believe what's happening. I'm very disappointed in Kavanaugh. I just told you something that I haven't told a lot of people. In retrospect, he hasn't All right. He just hasn't had the courage you need to be a great justice. I'm basing this on more than just the election. Wolf gives an entertaining account of what it was like for the book authors who were given Trump interviews at Mar-a-Lago. And by the way, once again, Donald Trump, giving interviews to authors who are obviously going to write books, scathing books about him and say how dumb and, disorganized and just mentally incapable of being president he is. But he continues to give them interviews because he's dumb and incapable of being president. Anyway, Wolf says this is what it's like to get a Trump interview at Mar-a-Lago. It's called the living room, but it's in fact the Mar-a-Lago lobby, a vaulted ceiling Rococo grand entrance, part hunting lodge, I doubt it, part Renaissance palazzo, but it is really the throne room. He sits in regulation dark suit and shiny baby blue or fire red tie on a low chair in the center of the room, his legs almost daintily curled to the side, seeing a lineup of supplicants or chatting on the phone, all public conversations. All right. And why would Trump talk to Wolf? That's my question. Who wrote two earlier bestsellers with devastating accounts of Trump dysfunction? The fact that he was talking to me might only reasonably be explained by his absolute belief that his voice alone has reality-altering powers, Wolf writes. Trump told Wolf, I don't blame you, I blame my people. Which, fine, whatever. So yeah, he just figures he can sweet talk his way out of being slammed in a book. And, he can't. But I'm glad he continues to believe that that's the case. All right. Speaking of Trump being a dope, I saw this one by way of Julia Ioffe, who says, here you go. There you have it. A cogent and precise Ukraine policy. Retweeting the tweet of, let's see, who are we looking at here? Julie, Brooklyn multiracial resistor. Okay, got it. Who has this screenshot of, I don't know what, but I guess asked by a Fox News reporter, what should we do about Ukraine? Trump answers as follows. Well, what I would do is, we have tremendous military capability. And what we can do without planes, to be honest with you, without 44-year-old jets, what we can do is enormous. And we should be doing it. And we should be helping them to survive. And they're doing an amazing job. Well, okay, there you go. All the cogency you could possibly want in policy making. We should be helping them. Whatever it is we can do, we should do it. We should ram the ramparts. We should so gallantly be streaming, etc., etc. All the things. Take over the airports. Ram the ramparts. Whatever we have to do. And he's not clear about who we're doing this for, but I think it's supposed to be assumed that we think he's now pro-Ukraine and all of this. But no. Okay, let's see. Other fun items. Actually, there's quite a lot in the last day or so of Twitter, including, by the way, lots of reports from various locations around the globe, including, let's see, the first one I saw was in the UK, I think, somebody saying, a letter from the school saying, they need our help in keeping the schools open. Here we are. Christy, oh boy. Schnickelfritz. Is that for real? Okay. That's quite a last name. Yeah, it appears to be a last name. Kirsty, not Christy, but Kirsty Schnickelfritz. I love it. Schnickel. Schnickelfritz at the end. Yeah, okay. Who tweets, or who alleges, in her tweet, letter from school warning us of extremely high incidence of COVID in school and asking us to, quote, assist in keeping the school fully open for all students. No masks, no testing, no ventilation changes, right? Just like Greg says, no ventilation, and we are supposed to help keep the effing school open. That's true. It's a good point. Lots of annoyed parents, I'm sure. Listen to parents. But, of course, this parent is, I think, if I remember correctly, is this someone from, who puts her location as UK. So, happening everywhere, I guess. We'll see whether others have the same thing to say. Oh, look, they do, as it happens. Same experience being reported by people in my Twitter thread in Seattle, right? I've got to scroll back down and find it because lost my way here. Got to get back up. It was, in fact, so Seattle, Chicago, same story. Robert Cruikshank here tweeting, 1 week ago, Seattle Public Schools unilaterally, ends the mask mandate despite teacher outcry. That was a week ago. Today, email from the school principal saying multiple positive cases have been identified in 2 classes, and they're asking all the kids to mask up for the next 2 weeks. So what do you know about that? And then there was, I think, a response in this thread somewhere. Somebody saying, yeah, same thing here in Chicago. Same deal. Lots of people. My district also ended the mask mandate, as most districts did. Now we're watching cases creep up. Somebody saying, right, like I said, in Chicago. By the way, my own local numbers, the coronavirus tracker email that I get from the New York Times, Loudoun County, 99 cases yesterday, a 21% increase from the day before. We went down to about 80. I think we made it to 60 and then started to bounce back up. We're now back regularly in the 80s and 90s, usually getting about the same as yesterday, slight increase, 2 or 3 more cases, but now a 21% increase from the day before. But it was weekend, Sundays, very little reporting going on Sundays. So you expect to see a big Monday bounce. And, luckily, not a huge outbreak yet here in Loudoun County, but I am getting concerned that we'll see this whole thing come rebounding back shortly. Speaking of which, I guess I can jump over to the thread. I might have put that in Scott's hands for the roundup yesterday, but I made a brief mention of it, but I didn't read the thread of Myung Cha, who identifies on Twitter as president of Home-Based Care and Chief Strategy Officer for Carbon Health, formerly head of Health Strategic Initiatives for Apple, who, may or may not know what he's talking about, but has this interesting thread in which he claims that this is the calm before another COVID storm in the U.S., which will be worse than it should be due to short-term and hopeful thinking. The BA2 cycle has already started here and will be in full bloom, he predicts, in 2 to 3 weeks, with a much bigger surge than anyone saw coming. But now that we see it coming, is it going to be bigger than we see coming? I don't know. Not anyone, but some of the people anyway. You get the idea. There are many differences between the UK and Europe and the US. That is to say, UK/Europe and the US. And Brexiteers must be loving it that they get included that way. UK/Europe. UK is in Europe, but it's not part. All right, you get the idea. Many differences between what's going on in Europe and the U.S., but almost all the differences weigh against the U.S. avoiding the impact of BA2, right? And we're still waiting on this thing, and the first wave took about 6 weeks until we mirrored Europe and then surpassed them. But I feel like we've been hearing about BA2 for 2 to 3 weeks now, so maybe we are about halfway there, and it will be 2 to 3 weeks before we see it really take hold. What are the factors that are different between here and there that weigh against us? Lower vaccination and booster rate, of course. Less testing going on here as well. Fewer COVID restrictions. Of course, we all rallied for that and drove halfway across the country demanding that there be fewer restrictions, even though... And it worked, except it worked before the trucks arrived. So anyway, and then, of course, the longer period of waning immunity. Now, the thread continues... The trough of COVID cases in Europe occurred when BA2 penetration reached 50 to 60% based on genomic surveillance. BA2 figures come from outbreak.info, and then there's a chart included here. And, well, I'm not even 100% certain what that is telling me. The trough in Europe cases, okay, when BA2 penetration reached 50 to 60%, like, I don't know why that would coincide with the trough, wouldn't you? But I'll go on. I'll read on because there's some other important points, which I understand a little bit better. We'll have to discuss this with Greg, I guess. The US BA2 penetration as of last week was about 23% and has roughly doubled every week since early February. At this rate, we would reach the 50 to 60% threshold in the coming week. And I guess at that point, BA2 becomes the prevalent strain, I guess, and that's when we keep going up. Is that what that's supposed to mean? Once more than 50% of reported infections turn out to be BA2 rather than the original Omicron, which is on its way down, that's when we start going back up again, and we're about halfway there. So we are most likely to see cases plateau and infect the Northeast first. Our ability to see this infection, this is the part that bothered me, our ability to see this infection in the U.S. is hindered by the overall decrease in testing and the mix shift toward antigen test kits. We do much less testing than Europe does. As laid out really well here in someone else's thread, I'll identify it in a minute, the new CDC community levels metric is now a lagging, I added the word now, is a lagging indicator, and we'll never see this surge coming with this metric before it's already upon us. This was the part that worried me the most, right? That now we were driving decisions like school masking and whether or not to close a school or a business or something like that based on community transmission levels. And I guess also, how we're doing in hospitalization, right? We have enough beds to take care of people if they do get it, which was a metric I didn't love either. But community prevalence as an indicator now, like I said, I add the word now to this becoming a lagging indicator because of the way we're doing our testing, right? We won't hear about high community prevalence until a greater percentage of the people who are coming down with symptoms and therefore testing are getting PCR tests. That's the only way we're going to know whether the community transmission is up, because no one's reporting their antigen test results. So, right. So by the time they say, yeah, we're in a period of high transmission here, we should be masking in the school, it'll be way too late. Anyway, the thread that Myung Cha includes here is that of Jason L. Salemi. Salemi, I don't know how he pronounces his last name, Salemi, and a bunch of initials after his name, a tenured associate professor of epidemiology, so you've got that going for you, which is nice. And he says, as BA2 looms, CDC updated their community levels metric yesterday, and I also obtained and linked the older community transmission metric data. Below is a reflection of where we were yesterday in terms of risk level using each metric and the CDC's color scheme for each. Okay, so the old metric of community transmission, which it's hard to tell, like, what the hell is the difference between these things, or I don't know the definitions well enough to know, but I guess where they used to have high, substantial, moderate, low, and null community transmission, the data for March 17th would have shown a map with, plenty of red and yellow all over the place, but, a predominantly red shifted map here with the upper New England in red, some of it in dark red, but the high north showing the most red, but then an Appalachian red streak, and Texas and desert Southwest as well, plus Alaska. But under the new community level metric, for whatever reason, it shows, there's only three colors: red for high level, yellow for medium level, and green for low level. It shows a vast, swath of green across the entire country, with few exceptions. Northern Maine really seems to be in trouble no matter what you do. And then Appalachia also showing up on this map. But it shows a much different picture. Green versus red is interpreted very differently. Now, Myung Cha's thread continues here. It's hard to interpret case rates given the belated push to send free antigen tests to U.S. households. But my bet is that there's been a big change in behavior with upwards of 3 to 5 times more antigen tests than PCR right now. Many positive cases are probably not being recorded. Positivity rates for PCRs don't look like they are increasing yet, but there are some signs that antigen test positivity is increasing in the Northeast week over week, with large increases of 126% in Delaware, 69% in Maine, 27% in Massachusetts, 21% in New Hampshire, 10% in New York, 60% in Rhode Island, according to CDC. Delphi, CMU.edu, COVIDcast, Carnegie Mellon Delphi Research Group. The thread continues, Google's search trends for cold-like symptoms also seem to be on the rise right now, one of the really early indicators of the progress of the pandemic. In venues like schools where serial PCR testing is still being done, it looks like there's an uptick in cases. Here is an example from the past week in Massachusetts public schools where cases were up 19%. My hypothesis is that transmission in the community is higher than we can see based on official data because most people are likely experiencing symptoms, testing at home, and not seeking care. This by itself would be fine if Omicron wasn't so transmissible. I have had numerous friends tell me that they got sick with Omicron in January and tested repeatedly negative with an antigen test during the early onset of symptoms. This is likely due to the lower sensitivity of these tests compared to PCR. Once BA2 really gets going, this false negative phenomenon will likely drive false confidence in not having COVID, with an unintended consequence of driving higher transmission to others, because you'll go out. I don't have COVID. I'm going out. We don't shelter in place just for common cold. I'm going out. You should be, but people go out anyway. But that's always the advice. You feel sick, stay home. Well, we don't do this stuff for other diseases. Well, they tell us to. We just don't do it. Anyway, what is also unfortunate is that this false negative rate may delay treatment with MABs. What are we talking about here? Antibiotics? Okay. Not antibiotics, but I don't know. What do we call these things? I don't know. But I don't know well, let's look it up, I guess. If Greg were here, he would know what that stood for. And we'd know right off the monoclonal antibodies. There we go. I know the phrase was in my head somewhere, and I'm like, I can't bring this back. So I've never seen it referred to that way. Well, this is MABs, monoclonal antibodies. I better would have figured that out. But lowercase m for some reason and capital A in this abbreviation, MABs, multiclonal antibodies. Okay, so basically what we're saying here in this thread is if you get a false negative, well, you're not going to go to get the monoclonal antibodies to treat this thing. Although then we found out that it wasn't really working on Omicron anyway, didn't we? All right, well, what's unfortunate is the false negative rate may delay treatment with monoclonal antibodies. There was one kind that was still working against Omicron, right? And oral therapies that so far have been sitting unused despite all of the hype. That's true too. And remember, we were going to get those things delivered to us by the armed forces under Trump, but millions of people continued to get the disease and didn't get anything like that in terms of help. But it's out there. But yeah, I wonder if it's going to end up becoming the what was the now I'm forgetting all of my things. It's true, I'm getting affected by age here. But the flu treatment, that Tamiflu, right, that they shipped out to every place so that everyone would be able to treat their flu at early onset, and it didn't really work, and people didn't know until too late, and so we ended up having to throw all the stuff out as it expired on pharmacy shelves and hospital shelves all over the place. All right, he includes a chart here. How much of the national supply of COVID-19 therapeutics is being used? That's an interesting metric with a whole bunch of hard to pronounce names about these things. At least one of them, Sotrovimab. Wow. has the highest share of available supply ordered, and the share that's been used, everybody is basically 42% and below. Paxlovid only being used about 32%, and then the others much less. So an interesting point there too, dispatching all of our resources and sending out all of these monoclonal antibodies for people to use early on in combination with home testing, and they're not being used, and they're all going to end up getting, I think, dumped at some point soon. Deaths are still stubbornly high despite the availability of monoclonal antibodies, and the orals still as high as early January during the last Omicron wave. We aren't doing a good job of treating high-risk COVID-positive patients, and not a good condition to be in as we enter another wave. We'll be right back after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. Okay, I think I had the mute button reversed on this, but okay. Everything seems to be working now. I found, by the way, that clever tweet about Josh Hawley and his comment about Eric Greitens, and you belong in handcuffs if you hit a woman or a child. Walt is frozen. Also goes by his first name of Greg, but Walt is frozen is where you'll find him on Twitter. You probably follow him as well as I do. You follow him as well as I do. If you also follow him, then you're doing just fine at following him. The computer takes care of it for you. But yeah, it was his comment. If Hawley really believed this, he would have co-sponsored one of the competing bills, if nothing else, to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. But he not only voted against reauthorizing Violence Against Women Act, but wouldn't even co-sponsor any of the Republican alternatives. So even better. Now that I've found the original here. All right, let's see. Is there a little bit more to this thread? Yes, there is. How much more? Well, it goes on at some length. We're going to continue worrying about coronavirus or move on? We'll do a little bit more. The hope that we have enough of an immunity wall where we don't experience a rise in hospitalizations and deaths is wishful thinking, says Myung Cha. Hospitalizations in the UK are up 30% week over week right now. And we usually do follow them pretty closely. The irony is that eagerness to go back to normal and the lifting of social distancing measures will accelerate the surge beyond what otherwise would have been. Spring break. Oh, yes, right. Shoot. Return to work. That definitely happening. And lifting of masking in schools will allow the virus to flourish. A perfect storm. Oh, can't believe it. For many people, going back to the pre-COVID behaviors may seem fine, and the actual risk from BA2 may be low. What is at stake is the impact on immunocompromised and older adults who will be disproportionately affected by another surge, along with our healthcare system. Those groups are being hospitalized and dying disproportionately in the current BA2 surge in the UK, although I will say the day-to-day numbers do appear to be, diminishing just as quickly for BA2 as the original Omicron. That is to say, a very fast-moving and fast-diminishing spike. So maybe that's something. Wouldn't be surprising, this continues to see a higher reinfection rate among people who got sick during the first Omicron surge. We'll see whether that's the case, but there's some very highly technical discussion from Eric Topol on this. It's used as reference by incorporation here. He says Omicron breakthrough infections induce a weak neutralizing antibody response, 1/10 of that of Delta, 1/3 of that of a booster shot, suggesting reduced protection versus infection or a future variant if you happen to catch Omicron. For those who say this is just like the flu, stop saying it, I would say, but Myung Cha continues, the periodicity, of waves is much higher frequency than normal flu season. That's true, right? It's not as predictable an annual event. It just seems to be happening all the time. This volatility is not something our healthcare system is built to handle. If this BA2 wave is much worse than people expect, it will put the government in a tough spot to reintroduce restrictions without any of the funding to respond in a timely fashion. Yes, we heard about that last week. We could be in rough shape by May/June without much recourse. Oh dear. Well, that sounds like it sucks. And that's the end of the thread, though. Well, too bad for us, I guess I'd have to say about that. Plenty of other things that I can run down the list on here. Let's see if we can scoot through a few more items that I saw in the Twitter feed, and then maybe we can hop back over to Pocket for one of those long read ideas that I have. But it's a little bit disorganized going through the Twitter feed, but there were so many things. I now feel like, all these fun little things that got said, and I wanted to share with you, including to bring things back to the Ketanji Brown Jackson hearings, still going on, of course, if you're still watching. Good observation by Twitter pal Illusory Tenant, who commenting on the several Republican senators who decided that somehow it was an excellent line of attack to say that the judge had supported, as they put it, supported court packing ideas or efforts. There have been no efforts, of course, but I guess the idea of expanding the Supreme Court, which Republicans, of course, like to label court packing because everybody remembers the term from being taught that it was a no-no in American history class in high school. And I don't know how supportive she was, but I guess she was open to the idea. Maybe she was an advocate. I don't really know for sure. But as Illusory Tenant points out, you can sweep away all of these accusations. Not that it will matter, but logically you can sweep them all away by saying, well, court expansion, that's up to you. That's your job, Senator. You're the only ones that can expand the court. If you decide you're not going to do it, if you want to fight against it, fight against it. If you win, no problem. If you lose, win an election and then you'll be able to win. But yeah, it doesn't matter. It's a great point. It doesn't make a damn bit of difference what judges think about the prospect of expanding the courts. The courts have to be expanded by Congress, and that's up to you. And by rights, that should terminate the line of attack. But because A, facts don't matter, and B, no senators watch the exchanges that other senators are having with the judge, they won't even realize that their talking point has been defeated and debunked before they begin their questioning. So, all right, it's of limited use, but still a point well taken. All right. Let's see. I thought this too, I guess, coming out of the hearings. Lindsey Graham, in his speechifying yesterday, apparently wanted to take time to say that calling Republicans racist in these things, quote, is not going to fly with us because they're used to it, which, was a point that was supposed to stand on its own. Yeah, Republicans are used to being called racist. Well, largely because they keep acting like racists, and that's why people keep doing it. But it was an interesting, the thread or the video was being offered up by Asin. I never did really figure out how to pronounce the name, but a very popular video blogger on Twitter who provided this clip. And it was, again, being provided to say, they're used to being called racist because, everybody knows that they're racist. But on top of that, I thought it was interesting that he would say, you got to stop calling us racist. It's not going to work because we've heard it a million times and it just has no impact on us anymore. I was going to say, I'd like to talk to you about socialism, sir. just for a minute. And not to define it for you, because I probably can't do a good job of that. But yeah, maybe you could stop with the socialism thing. If that mattered, if it mattered that the tax didn't work, we'd be done with that one by now. Anyway, so that seems like a fun observation to make as well. Let's see. Scrolling down. Are there any more things, observations from the hearings that need passing on? No, I think we've probably covered it on that front. Though there are definitely still a few other things that I think, scrolling down the list, I saw earlier and said, ooh, we should bring that up too. But there's just no way to, I need like 5 screens so that I can open up all these things and file them away so that everyone can see. Yes, right. The other day, retweeting this from James Surowiecki. Does he say Surowiecki? Does he put the O in there, or just Surowiecki? Whom you all know, no doubt. Also from Twitter. And he has his own Medium, not Substack, but Medium outlet as well. But noting here an article in the New York Times, which I will open up. Is it his own piece or someone else's? It is someone else. Okay, here we go. But a good observation. But this opinion piece, even though it seems to be based on, straight up fact, from the New York Times, who's unhappy with schools? The answer surprised me, writes Jessica Gross in her Jessica Gross on Parenting column. Or I guess that is a newsletter that's available to subscribers. And I don't know, is that what this is? And it gets run online as opinion? I'm not sure. All right. Well, at any rate, I thought this was of some interest. Tucked into a New Yorker article by Jill Lepore about the spate of school board fights over just about everything was a statistic that caught my eye. Despite all the ink spilled lately about clashes over masking, critical race theory, and over which books to assign or ban, American parents are happy overall with their children's education. Lepore explains, in making up our mind what school choice is really about, the education scholars Sigal R. Ben Porath and Michael C. Johannek point out that about 9 in 10 children in the United States attend public schools, and the overwhelming majority of parents, about 8 in 10, are happy with their kids' schools. And you might wonder why the sudden focus on the outrage of parents and their dissatisfaction with public schools. And the answer, I think, is because that was a focal point of the Virginia election, but then we learned that it wasn't angry parents with kids in school who swung the election, but voters age 75 plus who don't have kids in school who swung the election. What's up with the actual parents? Once again, just a vocal minority framed in the shot to look like a vast majority, but they actually aren't. Now the article continues, though I am quite happy with my children's public school, am surrounded by parents who are mostly happy with their kids' public schools, and when I was a kid, attended a public school that my parents were basically happy with, I was still surprised the number was that high. I would have thought that the latest numbers about parental satisfaction might be lower because of all the pandemic-related chaos. But according to Gallup, which has tracked school satisfaction annually since 1999, in 2021, 73% of parents of school-aged children say they are satisfied with the quality of education their oldest child is receiving. More parents were satisfied in 2021 than they were in 2013 and 2002, when satisfaction dipped into the 60s. And in 2019, we were at a high point in satisfaction, 82%, before the COVID pandemic dealt schools a major blow. Digging deeper into the Gallup numbers revealed that the people who seem to be driving the negative feelings toward American schools do not have children attending them. Yeah, and I think that's fairly obvious, and we've made that point before. Overall, only 46% of Americans are satisfied with schools. Democrats, women older adults and lower income Americans are more likely than their counterparts to say they are satisfied with K through 12 education, Gallup found. My hypothesis is that it's a bit like the adage about Congress. People tend to like their own representatives, and that's why they keep sending them back year after year, but tend to have a dim view of Congress overall. We've definitely heard that. Polling done by the Charles Butt Foundation. Wow. Not only have I never heard of them, but oh my God, what are you doing? The Butt Foundation? 2 T's and everything. I mean, it'd be weirder if it didn't, but the Charles Butt Foundation. Now, I guess if you make, enough money to have a foundation, you're going to get past the fact that your last name is Butt. But I think you should spend a couple bucks changing it. It could be anything else. On the other hand, I hadn't considered the possibility to change his name to Butt, which is also something you can do and get away with if you have a ton of money. And what a great trolling device that is. My name is Charles Smith, but it's not very distinctive, and I want people to know that it's me when they look me up on the internet. And I have so much money, I can rise above all the ridicule I'm about to get. To troll everybody, to own the libs, I'm changing my name to Butt. I could get behind that. That's great. Fantastic. Write that down. Anyway, polling done by the Charles Butt Foundation shows a similar dynamic playing out in Texas, a state where book bans have been well publicized, and an anti-critical race theory bill was signed into law in December. This is one of a dozen, but okay, in a dozen states like that. More than 2 dozen, I would say. The third annual poll, which was of 1,154 Texas adults, found the share of public school parents giving their local public schools an A or B grade, isn't that fun, is up 12 percentage points in 2 years to 68% in the latest statewide survey on public education by the Charles Butt Foundation. Wow. Demonstrating all sorts of cracks in the public facade on schools. In contrast with the increase among parents, there's a decline in school ratings among those without a child currently enrolled in K through 12 schools. Maybe having a kid in there is interesting. If it really was the phenomenon of, well, people love their own representative but not the institution of Congress, once you don't have a representative to like, i.e., in this case, don't have a kid in schools, then there's no local school to be satisfied with. You just say, it's all crap these days. And the number goes up. 48% of non-parents now give their local public schools A's and B's versus 56% a year ago, when they also had no basis to be grading the schools. This isn't to say that our education system, broadly speaking, is humming along perfectly. There are so many ways it can improve, particularly in serving students in schools with higher poverty rates and those with physical disabilities and learning differences. But it does mean that we should take stories with a grain of salt when they present the American education system as a fact-free zone, no longer focused on teaching the basics that parents are or should be fleeing from in any significant or sustained way. There's a weird paragraph. As the Gallup polling also showed, homeschooling is back to its pre-pandemic rate of 4%, and data from the National Center for Education Statistics found that by far the steepest drops in public school enrollment during the 2021 school year were among children in pre-K or kindergarten. These kids likely will not be away from public schools permanently. Their start was merely delayed. It should also make us a bit more reflective about election results. There we are, that are framed as a result of displeasure with schools. Target Smart, this is what we talked about the other day, which bills itself as a democratic political data and data services firm, analyzed records showing who voted in Virginia's 2021 gubernatorial election, which has been touted as a win for the Republican Glenn Youngkin. It was based on unhappiness over the way the previously Democratic-led state handled this pandemic in schools. Target Smart found, of course, all the same things we learned. Turnout among, because we read the same thread, turnout among voters age 75 or older increased by 59% relative to 2017, while turnout among voters under age 30 only increased by 18%. Notably, turnout in all other age groups combined, 18 to 74, which would likely include parents of school-aged children, only increased by 9% compared to 2017. This silver surge is an untold story that fundamentally undermines the conventional wisdom that COVID-19 protocols in schools and fears about critical race theory and curriculum determined the outcome of the election. All of this at least raises the question of whether some of the people driving the outrage, even animus against schools, might not have as much skin in the game and might not have any recent experience with teachers or curriculum. As we head into the midterms, at the very least, we should resist easy conclusions about who's angry about what's happening in our public schools and whether it has anything to do with the reality of what's going on day to day for millions of children and their families. Very interesting. The fact of skin in the game, the mention of skin in the game, reminds me that Rick Scott and his weirdo agenda for the National Republican Senatorial Committee, an agenda with which Mitch McConnell finds himself in disagreement, was all about raising taxes on millions of Americans because everybody should have, quote, skin in the game, and they shouldn't be, allowed to vote if they don't have skin in the game or whatever. But, if the same principle were to apply, you might say that maybe you can't disenfranchise people, but what if it was the case that you could only vote in school board elections if you had kids in school or were about to have kids in school? I don't know how they would track that. They'd never really be able to control that. And it sounds like a bad idea in general, and everybody should have a say in how public funds are spent, but it really does raise an interesting point. If it's an interesting point that people should have skin in the game by way of taxes, then they should have skin in the game by way of kids in public school, too. And if they don't have it, maybe it's not that important. But anyway, James Surowiecki was tweeting about that article and saying that most parents, the way he summed it, 3 in 4 are happy with the quality of their kids' public school education and happier than they were 10 years ago. The people who seem to be driving the negative feelings towards American schools do not have children attending them, and that's damn important and something we ought to keep in mind and probably will return to over and over as well. All right, let's see. Things to share with you in the last 10 minutes or so of the show. Long read thing that probably means we won't get through, but I keep hinting at wanting to go back to. Actually, something maybe you saw very recently over at Daily Kos. It was posted over the weekend. The diary of D'Artagnan, who I think long-time user that many of you are probably fairly familiar with, but posting this piece. And I share it with you in connection with, let's see, was it the end of last week that we shared the story of, the answer to the question of, well, how do you become one of these oligarchs anyway? Are there cute, cuddly, fuzzy, nice oligarchs, or are they all pretty much thugs? And the answer was, all pretty much thugs at heart. And, at bottom, you have to be willing to do some terrible and maybe even violent things to have wrested enough control of public resources and privatized them to become a billionaire oligarch. But what gave rise to Vladimir Putin, and where did he come from? And it raises a good point, this diary and the sources that it relies on, that we don't know. I mean, we know about what his background was. He was in the KGB, et cetera, but there's not a whole lot of, I don't think, run-of-the-mill understanding, for everyday folks of where Putin came from and what he did to rise to power, including me. So I thought I would read through this. The Moscow apartment bombings of 1999, forgotten here in this country, I'm sure, and the curious rise of Vladimir Putin. D'Artagnan offers this to us. It's disturbing but predictable that as the Ukraine crisis continues to unfold, many Americans are getting what amounts to their first crash course on Russian President Vladimir Putin. I've heard his name for a long time, of course, but that's about it. One of the many remarkable consequences of the Trump administration was the degree to which the views of Republican rank-and-file voters were influenced by Trump's solicitous, almost groveling behavior toward Putin, a bizarre non sequitur that must have drawn incredible consternation from those in the U.S. intelligence community and others intimately familiar with Putin's actual history. 2 polls in June of last year revealed Republicans had higher approval of Putin than President Biden. That's a, sticking it in his eye. They don't they don't know anything about Putin. They just know they don't like Biden. With roughly 1 in 5 viewing him, Putin, favorably in 2017. But despite what they may think they know from our sporadic, reactive, and superficial news media, the reality is that most Americans know next to nothing about Putin. Perhaps if they were aware that credible historians and journalists believe Putin was possibly complicit in the massacre of hundreds of his own citizens in order to facilitate his rise to power, they might be prompted to reevaluate these snapshot perceptions. Perhaps, perhaps not. Either way, it seems like an opportune time for a refresher course on the ascent to power of an individual who has his nuclear missiles on a hair trigger, all of them aimed at our homes and families right now. The following is a complex, somewhat Byzantine narrative that contains, as many such narratives do, an equally Byzantine cast of characters and organizations. It's primarily based on unofficial sources, mostly investigative journalists and authors whose access to the evidence is by default secondhand or circumstantial, and its conclusions have been alternatively affirmed and disputed. As noted below, the U.S. government has not confirmed or refuted its conclusions. Despite its recent belligerence, Russia's interests remain critical strategic considerations for the U.S. long into the future. And of course, this is the perfect time to bring something up like this that's long and Byzantine, as we only have a few minutes left. But I want you to get the flavor for this. The leadership of post-Soviet Russia was a hot mess in the summer of 1999, plagued by credible reports of widespread corruption and accused of stashing his own and his family's ill-gotten money in secret foreign bank accounts. Russian President Boris Yeltsin was taking refuge in the bottle, this time with an unparalleled vengeance. His unity political movement appeared to be careening toward defeat in the upcoming parliamentary and presidential elections. And according to John B. Dunlop, now a senior emeritus fellow at the Hoover Institute, and author of The Moscow Bombings of September 1999, Yeltsin was desperately searching for a game changer, something drastic to effect a reversal of his vertiginous fortunes. Did I get that right? He had a few cards left to play, but eventually settled on one, finding a pretext to force either the cancellation of the elections themselves or creating a national emergency that would suddenly rally the Russian people to his side. It's sounding bad, especially given the title. Moscow bombings? Indeed, he had a very few cards left. Still, one of them was the malleability of Russian nationalism, specifically a historical ethnic aversion and suspicion of the independence-minded Chechen people. And we hear a lot about the Chechens getting involved in the Ukraine invasion now, and we think back and say, yeah, I used to, but why would they cooperate with the Russians at this point? Didn't they have a very contentious history? Something tells me back in the 90s, yeah. Well, reality tells you that. But apparently a long-standing ethnic aversion and suspicion between the two, with whom the Russian Federation, the Chechen people, with whom the Russian Federation had been in a state of war throughout the mid-1990s. The other was a friend with unlimited resources that Yeltsin had in his pocket, the Russian oligarch Boris Berezovsky. According to Dunlop, Berezovsky was tasked by Yeltsin to pay enormous ransoms to Chechen separatists who had lately, in their long-standing efforts to establish an independent Chechnya, kidnapped several Russian nationals. As predicted, these payments had the desired reverse effect, not of relaxing tensions between Chechnya and Russia, but rather motivating the same separatists to invade neighboring Dagestan in August of 1999. Thus, according to Dunlop, a Kremlin-sponsored national emergency was conceived, a potential incursion by Chechnya, which might justify postponing the looming elections, which Yeltsin feared. Yeltsin had no illusions about his own unpopularity, but reasoned that if his own political opponents could be discredited, a hand-picked successor could be maneuvered into office. And Yeltsin, along with his family and associates, would be spared prosecution. That sounds familiar, too. As reported by Amy Knight, reviewing Dunlop's analysis for the New York Review of Books, the plan went very smoothly up to a point, with the Chechen rebels allowed into and out of Dagestan without hindrance. Now, to try and sum things up and give you a foreshadowing of what is in this very long piece, and you may want to read it on your own Later on, I do too. Maybe we'll return to it once we have been able to digest it. The suggestion appears to be that with the tension with the Chechen rebels, and Chechnya and their struggle, I think, came to the recognition of most of us here in the United States when those Chechen rebels were accused, credibly enough, I guess, from our point of view, by Moscow authorities, by Russian authorities, of being terrorists, of executing terrorist attacks in pursuit of their fight for independence, including, I guess, several bombings in Moscow, apartment building bombings in Moscow. And it looks like the implication here is maybe the Chechens did it, maybe the Chechens didn't do it. Maybe they had a little help with it, maybe they had nothing whatsoever to do with it at all, and maybe it was former KGB officer and general ruthless person Vladimir Putin who arranged for these things to A, happen, B, be blamed on Chechen rebels, so that C, there was some sympathy in reserve that comes out for Boris Yeltsin, and he can engineer a graceful exit from politics and handing off the Russian government to a successor of his choosing, and as I guess it turns out to be Vladimir Putin after all. And maybe that's what's behind his becoming the oligarch of oligarchs. That would give you, I think, a very different view of Russia and the Russian government, in case we haven't convinced you over the years that it was really just a mobocracy and not a real government.
Networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Just something to think about here, since we had some extra time on our hands, because Joan's working hard to summarize what's going on in the Judiciary Committee. Now, next, of course, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. We'll touch on these and many other subjects, including, of course, what's going on in Ukraine and elsewhere around the world. Please do stay tuned. We'll see you tomorrow.